Well, hello there again, friends. Thanks for clicking on this video. We're going to be continuing the series in bows and arrows, more specifically arrow making. I'm of a very strong mind that the arrow is even a little more important than what the bow is. And as I mentioned in the previous video, I've been shooting longbows, making arrows for several years. I even showed you the very first issue of Primitive Archer magazine that I purchased. And I also want to show that the very first time that I ever competed at a Mountain Man rendezvous with archery was in 1999. It was with the Arizona Muzzleloading Association, and I took second place, 1999. So I've got a lot of knowledge when it comes to this archery stuff, and I know the day and age of the internet, there's always going to be somebody there saying, "You're wrong about this." I don't care. I'm showing you what has worked for me over all these years and what has given me a measure of success. Okay. Again, I mentioned it in a previous video. This year, 2025, I took first place at the Santa Fe Trail Rendezvous archery competition, the trail walk. Okay, so I've got this experience that I'd like to share with you. Whether it works for you or not, that's something you have to determine for yourself. What works for me may not work for you. You may not like the way I do it. You may prefer to be more primitive. Go ahead and do it, but I'm just showing what works for me. Now, under the previous video, there was a commenter that wanted to see or ask something about making the shafts. I talked about buying a 3/8 dowel cutter. Well, I'm going to show you what I did and how I start my arrow shafts. Go to the lumber yard, get a good piece of wood. Make sure the grain is straight. I've talked about orienting your grain, so make sure you look at the end grain and determine that by making these shafts this way, everything is going to work out. That's on you. Once you get the board selected, get it home. I put it in my table saw, and I just cut 3/8 by 3/8 square stock. I have a jointer, so then I just very gently take off those four corners and then just get it down close to where I can, and I'll show you right now. This is just an old piece of doweling that I started making out of oak, and for whatever reason I set it aside, but if you can kind of look after I have jointed it, this is kind of what it looks like. It's more octagonal than anything else. Then what I do, here's the dowel cutter. I insert it and I just start cutting by hand. And I just get enough length so that I can chuck it in a drill. So I wanted to stop it right there because the jig that I made has got a block right here that has a 3/8 hole cut into it. This just helps me stabilize the shaft. Otherwise, with that length, the shaft itself can start bouncing and bending, and you really risk snapping it. So that's why I have this little block there with a 3/8 hole in it to help stabilize the shaft as I'm cutting it. Let me conclude. And then at that point, I just flip it end for end and just finish cutting that end down the size. Now if you look at the shaft, you can see that there's little rings in it. I don't know how well the camera's picking it up. At that point, I just take and sand everything out, sand it smooth, and then I can start getting a size and a spine. For these, let me show you what else I do. So I also made a set of sanding jigs. I took a block of wood, drilled a 3/8 hole through them, and then I very carefully cut them in half. I just wrap sandpaper on one side, and then I just sand with it. There's no sandpaper in here, this is just a demonstration. Okay, and it keeps everything round, keeps everything true, and it just sands everything smooth. It's not difficult to make arrow shafts. You just got to have the right tools, a little bit of patience, and you can see, you can make a good arrow shaft. Now the other thing that you can also do with a 3/8 dowel cutter and the jig that I've made here is that it allows me to make ramrods for muzzle loaders. So it's not just a singular purpose making arrow shafts, I can also make ramrods for muzzle loaders. So for me, it was well worth the investment and the time to do this. Okay, now I want to move on and I want to talk about fletching. Okay, and I mentioned in the previous video, left wing, right wing, does it really make a difference? And the short answer is no. Okay, you just have to make sure that when you cut your fletching, that the shiny side of all three feathers are going in the same direction. Okay, so if you look at this particular fletching, depending on whose information you're looking at, this could be a right wing or this could be a left wing, depending on the shiny side and the dull side. But what you really want to make sure is that all of the feathers are going in the same direction on one shaft. So if you're a left-handed shooter, it doesn't matter if your fletching is left-handed. Doesn't matter if it's right-handed, because it's been my experience, it makes no difference. And in particular, because I fletch all my vanes straight. I don't put a twist on them, helicoil. I just leave them straight, okay? So it really doesn't make a difference. Now, if you're going to process your own feathers, there's a huge difference between your pinion feathers. And generally with a pinion feather, these are the 4 or 5 feathers, 6 feathers maybe, that are out at the very, very end of the wing. Okay? And this is what a pinion feather looks like. This is what they would call a primary feather. Okay? Then you have what you call secondary feathers. These are the feathers that begin behind your primary feathers. Okay? Now, and that's what I have all right here, what I'm going to be demonstrating. These are all secondary feathers. Okay? They're not the primary. But here's something that you might want to bear in mind. And I know a lot of guys don't like using secondary fletching feathers because they don't hold up as well. And there is a measure of truth in that. They don't. But if you're going to be using secondary feathers and you want to strengthen them, then get some hairspray. That's all you got to do. Spray them with hairspray. It's not that difficult. Okay? Now, when it comes to preparing your fletching, you can see that there's a vein right here, this feather. What you want to do is take an X-Acto knife and cut right down the center of that. Now, if you look at it like this, that right there should be telling you that this is a right wing or a left wing. I really don't care if you call it left or right wing. Pay attention to when you put your feathers on your shaft, they're all going in the same direction. Don't mix match them. But let me show you something here, okay? I'm going to cut this right down the middle. And again, this is a secondary feather. It's not a primary. When you cut these down the center and separate them, and if it was large enough, you could see the difference. The same feather produces a right and a left wing vein. This is why I like personally using secondary fletching feathers, because I can get two feathers out of them. I can get a left and a right. Let me get this oriented correctly here. But you can see now that they're kind of turned into each other. You don't want to have this on your shaft because your shaft's not going to fly correctly. But I just demonstrated that with the secondary feathers you can get a left and a right wing feather out of it. Keep those separated. Once you get those cut, the next thing you'll want to do is take a pair of scissors and trim off the inside, because that's gonna not glue properly. It's gonna look ugly. So get yourself a small pair of scissors and then just trim to the inside. Let me cut it this way first, and then just trim to the inside. And that gives your vein some flexibility when you go to glue these down on the shaft. Okay. Now you can see, hopefully, that there's a little bit of height right here. It's kind of thick. You'll want to thin that down. Let me show you how I do that. Okay, I have a block here, It's actually just 2 pieces of 3/4 by 3/4 oak, and I just beveled the end so that I have a high spot, so that when I slide the feather into place to sand down the quill a little bit, it's right at the top. So I'll put a little clamp in it. It'll help hold it in place. I have a little sanding piece of wood here. I just wrap some sandpaper on it and just very gently sand the top of the quill so that it's more flat and it's a little shallower. Well, since it slipped, give me a chance to look at it, and I still got to go a little bit more. Now, they don't have to be truly perfect. You just kind of have to look at them and say, yep, that's good enough for what I do. And then you may, as you can see right here, it's a little part of the quill is sticking out here a little bit. You may want to just trim that down a little more closer or flush to the feather itself. It does aid in getting it to sit a little flat on top of the shaft. Okay, now let me show you how I cut these down to size. Now for myself, I like shooting a longer feather because it's been my experience, and also those that write for archery magazines and books and things like this, these longer feathers tend to stabilize the flight of your shaft a lot quicker than short vanes do, in particular with the slower speeds that primitive bows tend to generate. Okay, so I made myself a jig of the feather that I wanted to trim out. Okay, and this is a little, this particular feather is a little small for this because I don't typically use feathers this small, but once I get about where I want it, I'll cut behind the fletching, or the let's see here, kind of hard to do all this with one hand and demonstrate it. Okay, you can, let me see if I can turn it around and show you a little bit. See, I actually went a little further than what the vane is, the feather is, so that I can peel back some of these feathers because I like tying my arrows down in place. I guess I could cut that instead of rip it off. So I'll cut it. It's kind of hard to do this with one hand. So that's pretty much what it looks like right now. I have something forward to tie to the shaft, and I have something behind to continue tying it. Then I can place, well, to be honest with you, at this point I would glue this onto the shaft, and then I'll do my final trimming, sizing of the shape with this jig right here, because I'll lay this directly on the shaft and I get the right height, and then I can trim everything to size. Now this particular feather that I'm working with right now is a little, it's not as tall as I typically start with, but I'll give you an idea of how this works if you can imagine this being on the shaft. and being held in place. Don't have to necessarily trim the back, but when you get done with it, your fletching looks very similar to the jig right here. Okay, now obviously every shaft has 3 of those feathers on it, and your cock feather should be colored. It doesn't have to be, but I like coloring my cock feathers so that I know which direction they automatically go on without having, oh, I got it wrong, oh, let me turn it again, oh, got it wrong. You just automatically know. Let me show you real quick. So you can see that red feather right there. That's the cock feather. I don't even have to stop and think about which direction I need to place this onto my bowstring. I just know that that's what I want right there. Now, how do you get that color? Especially if you're processing your own feathers. There's 1 or 2 ways. You can either use a red Sharpie. Let me just demonstrate on the fletching that I just did. Since wild turkey feathers are barred and you have the white spot, just color in the white spot with whatever color Sharpie you prefer to use. Or there's another way of doing it. Let me demonstrate that. Pan of water and some colored Kool-Aid. Now typically when I do this, all of my cock feathers are already prepared, ready to go, so that I can dye them all at once. Stir it up. You can see it's really turned red. Now bear in mind the center one's already colored red, but we're going to be looking at the two in the front and the 2 in the back. And I'll just lay those in there and let them soak up. And I may do this overnight. I may do it for an entire day because it doesn't take dye immediately. They have to be wet. That's why one of the quickest ways to do it is with a Sharpie. That's the quickest way. And the feather, obviously, will float. But you have to, that's why I let them go for, you know, at least overnight. And like I said, by the time I get to this point, all my cock feathers are already picked out as to which one's going to be the cock feather. And typically, I use, I think it's Tropical Fruit Punch, I think is what it is, whatever one the red is. That seems to work just as well as any of them. And it's just usually 1 package is more than enough to dye these feathers. Okay, we'll let that soak for a little bit. And we'll come back to this in a little while. So part of the process also has to be attaching your field points. Now I shoot 125 grain field point. I buy my field points in bulk because you will not get every single field point to weigh 125 grains. Sometimes they weigh 127, sometimes they weigh 124, sometimes 123. So what I do is I go through and I weigh, and in this instance I'm making 6 new arrows, so I weigh 6 field points and I make sure they all weigh 125. Now, in all the years that I've been shooting at Mountain Man Rendezvous, Primitive Archery, a lot of the field points come off when you pull them out of the 3D targets. There's a simple trick that you can do to help avoid that. It won't avoid it 100%, but you can help with that. what I do is I take the field point, pair of vice grips, and I clamp it right at the end. Then I get a tap and I insert it. Now you don't want to use whatever size this is. I think these are 11/32. I don't remember right off the top of my head. Yeah, 11/32. You don't want to start cutting the threads right at the very end, because the metal is so thin you actually end up cutting the metal itself off of the field point itself. So you want to get a tap that just sits inside, and then you want to cut threads in it. I've already pre-cut this one. But anyhow, if you can look inside there, and if I can show the angle correctly, you can see that there's a series of threads cut in there. But they don't start right at the very top where you insert the shaft. They're down a little bit. And you're not going to get many threads. I think this one's only got 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 5 threads cut in here. The purpose is that when you go to insert the field point, what it does is it force cuts threads onto the arrow shaft itself. Now I do this, and I use a tacky glue, okay? And if you can look at that, you can see that there are threads now cut into the shaft itself. Okay? And the thing that you want to keep in mind, that once you get them set with the glue and you shoot at 3D targets, you want to make sure that when you pull them out, you want to turn your shaft clockwise as if you're actually tightening the point on. Because a lot of times, the reason why your field points are staying inside your 3D targets, because a lot of these guys that make these shafts that don't take the time to do this, they'll use a hot glue. Well, believe it or not, when this point hits that 3D target, it does generate enough heat to soften that glue up. On occasion, I'm not saying all the time, but on occasion it does generate enough heat to soften the glue so that when you go to pull the shaft out, whether you go clockwise or not, the point remains inside the 3D target. That's why I use a tacky glue. You might want to use, on occasion I'll even use 5-minute epoxy. I'll actually epoxy these in tubes, so not only does it adhere very strong to the point, but it adheres to the threads that I've just now cut into the shaft. And the threads are not deep, but you really don't need, deep shafts, threads to hold these field points on. Even my deer target out here, I've had that, for a couple of years now out here. I've only lost two field points in that target. And I've been shooting the crap out of that target, because I do a lot of archery shooting. Okay, so those are just some things that have worked for me over the years. In particular, keeping your field points onto the arrow shaft. So, as you can see, I've got quite a few feathers to process at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, with the exception of this. I do want to talk a little bit about fletching jigs. Now this particular jig is AAE. It's Arizona Archery Equipment or something like that. When I first started making my own arrows, the Bitzenberger, the Joe Jans, I think they all were god-awful expensive, and they still are. So I found this source, and at the time that I purchased this, they were $19 a piece. So I bought 2. I should have bought more, because I just looked the other day and they're up around $30 now. But still, once you get past your initial investment, it's, in my opinion, it's pretty cost effective to make your own arrows. Okay, So anyhow, I'm going to get busy here getting these feathers cut, sanded down, glued on. I used to use a what they call Duco or Ducco cement. Comes in a little green tube. I can't find that locally anywhere. The last time I ordered some, I ordered like 10 tubes, and before I got to using it all, they all hardened up. So now I'm just using Testor's model cement. You know, you get those little model cars, model planes, and that Testor cement. I have found that that works just as well. So here, before we go, I just want to take a look at this. This hasn't been very long. It's only been a few moments. I guess I should say a few moments, maybe 20 minutes, because I had to go in the house and do some things. But even with the short amount of time that I've had this feather in that Kool-Aid dye, you can see it's taken the color very, very well. And it would darken up maybe if I put a little bit more Kool-Aid in there or let it set longer. But you can see that that Kool-Aid works very well for dyeing the cock feather. Alrighty, I'm going to get busy. I'll get this video edited, uploaded, and then when I get all the shafts done and the feathers glued on, I'll show you how I tie the feather also in place. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and if you found this information to your liking, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your bestest of archery buddies. Bye.